One of the most distinctive and prominent features of the Shadow of the Erdtree's map isn't a building or natural land formation, but rather something that was once very much alive. This colossal dragon corpse located near the jagged peak. This corpse is so big in fact that it's visible at multiple points from way off in the distance as you traverse through the Land of Shadow. And since we find this corpse at the birthplace of dragon communion, the practice of slaying dragons and consuming their hearts in order to gain strength, it shouldn't come as a surprise that its thoracic cavity has been opened up, and most of its contents removed and presumably eaten. And considering that it probably wouldn't have just sat idly by while this happened, it also makes sense that we find some sort of equally gigantic weapon lodged in the back of its neck, which we can suppose is what killed or at least immobilized it while its heart was ripped from its chest. But just what kind of being is large enough to wield such a gigantic weapon, slay a dragon of this size, and consume its heart? I think I figured it out, and may have solved a few other major mysteries along the way. Let's talk about it. Zayf the Scholar here, and in order for this theory to make sense, we first have to do a bit of forensic cartography, reassembling the map into one that represents the lands between, before the Land of Shadow was hidden away by Marika. And once we do so, we can make quite a few interesting observations about how the old map and the Land of Shadow's map fit together. Most relevant to our discussion here is that the jagged peak would have been located in northern Caelid. And this makes a ton of sense if you think about it. Although it lacks Caelid's characteristic rot that was caused by Malenia's clash with Radahn at the Battle of Aeonia, it shares the same red skies as Caelid, and is similarly populated by a sizable number of drakes. And this also means that the colossal dragon corpse and grand altar of dragon communion in the Land of Shadow would have been located near Dragonbarrow and Greyoll, the mother of all dragons. It seems fair to assume that since Greyoll is no slouch in the size department, her mate was probably similarly large, and I feel like its size and location nearby in Caelid make this colossal dragon corpse a solid candidate. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but what do you guys think? Could this corpse have been Greyoll's mate, or were the drakes fathered directly by Bayle? But anyway, let's set that aside for a moment and get back to the question at hand. What could have been large enough to wield this weapon, kill a dragon of this size, and consume its heart? Well, the fact that he died in Caelid makes pinpointing the culprits a lot easier than you might think, as we can actually find the most likely suspects located right next to Greyoll in the base game. These absolutely massive humanoid remains. Now, these giant corpses scattered throughout Caelid have long been a mystery all their own. We find giants of a similar scale and appearance in the mountaintops of the giants, but we never knew why or even how the ones in Caelid got there, or indeed if they were even related to the ones up north at all. While making this video, I learned that the water in between Caelid and the mountaintops of the giants is spanned by an absolutely huge waterfall that would likely make the waters quite turbulent and crossing challenging, even for giants. And perhaps more importantly, we had no idea why the giants would even want to go southward into Caelid. But the item Borealis' Mist can perhaps provide us with some insight here. Its description states, "The ice dragons were once lords of the mountaintops long ago, until they were defeated by the fire giants and chased from the peak." So it's at least established by in-game text that the giants and the drakes had beef with one another, and that the giants chased the drakes from the northern mountaintops. And looking at our reconstructed map, pushing the drakes southward into Caelid would have been a lot more feasible, as there seems to have been a landmass that directly connected these northern and southern pieces of the continent together. We can thus posit that these now deceased giants entered into Caelid for a bit of drake hunting, and likely succeeded in bagging a really big one. I can only speculate here, but perhaps when Florissax and Placidusax gave the world dragon communion as a way of challenging Bayle and his bloodline, humans weren't the only race they gave it to. You can check out this video in the card if you want to learn more about Bayle, Placidusax, and Florissax, But to make a long story short, Placidusax wanted to see Bayle and his bloodline of drakes wiped out, and created Dragon Communion as a way to make that happen. And when your targets include drakes of this size, enlisting equally large allies who also hated the drakes seems like a fairly reasonable thing to do. The enemies of my enemies are my friends, after all. So I think it makes sense that these massive giants killed this huge drake and consumed its heart, marking the first instance of Dragon Communion. At the very least, I think it makes more sense than the theory I've seen floating around that Egon somehow accomplished killing this thing. But drop a comment if you have any thoughts, as I'm curious to know what you think. If this theory is right, these two massive corpses near Greyoll are a bit sad to consider. Perhaps after succeeding in killing her mate and eating his heart, these giants made their way to Dragon Barrow to take out another colossal drake. This time, however, they were bested by a Greyoll in her prime, acting out of revenge for her slain mate and in defense of Dragon Barrow and her children. I had always assumed that Greyoll was just decrepit from her old age, but perhaps she was actually injured in this conflict and immobilized, the perpetrators left dead by her side in plain sight this entire time. And circling back to Placidusax and Bayle, our reassembled map can actually help us solve another interesting mystery. Where was Farum Azula before it was launched skyward? The evidence strongly indicates that it too was in Caelid. In Bayle's arena at the summit of the Jagged Peak, we can find similar structures to those found in Placidusax's arena, albeit in a dilapidated state. Some people have speculated that this may have been Bayle's attempt to recreate Placidusax's chamber out of some sort of pride. But I think it makes a lot more sense to assume that they were once part of the same place, and Bayle's arena is actually what was left over when Farum Azula went skyward. Reddit user NoRecognition4464 and several others also seem to have come to a similar conclusion. But there's actually quite a bit more evidence that suggests Farum Azula was actually once in Caelid. For one thing, it's in Caelid that we find the Farum Great Bridge, which shares both a similar name and architectural motifs with Farum Azula. The Bestial Sanctum is also found just past this bridge, and it too shares interior and exterior architectural similarities with Farum Azula, which makes a lot of sense if they all used to be right next to one another. And this also explains why Greyoll, Dragon Barrow, and the Grand Altar of Dragon Communion are all found here. Caelid was once the epicenter of dragon activity in the lands between. Although this does remind me of some questions I've had for a long time now. What connection does Malekith have with Farum Azula and the dragons? We of course find him as Geraint in the Bestial Sanctum, and his boss fight is located in crumbling Farum Azula. Is he somehow tied to Placidusax and his fled god? Does he simply feel some sort of kinship with the beastmen? He is at times referred to as a beast clergyman, but I wonder if the connection is that simple. Another question I have is what caused Farum Azula to get launched into the sky anyway? Did Placidusax do this as a result of being grievously wounded by Bayle? Or did Bayle somehow do this as part of his assault on Placidusax? Again, if you guys have any thoughts to add here, I'm really curious to know what you think. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. It really helps out the channel a lot, and I genuinely appreciate it. And hey, I'd also appreciate it if you considered supporting my work by becoming a patron, a YouTube member, or buying me a coffee. Thanks a ton for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.